The Prime Minister has today unveiled plans to expand drilling in the North Sea, issuing 100 new gas and oil licences. The move places him in direct opposition with environmental activists such as Just Stop Oil. Chloe Naldrett from the group joins me now, along with Ross Clark, author of climate book Not Zero, and the Conservative MP Craig Mackinlay, who is chair of the Net Zero Scrutiny Group. Thank you all for joining me on the programme. Let's start with Chloe and see what she has to say about this. Hello, Chloe.
Hi, Vanessa.
So you can see all the different stories all over the papers today. Tell me what you make of it.
Well, Vanessa, you're saying that this puts Rishi Sunak in direct competition with Just Stop Oil and what we're saying. It's not just us, actually. It puts him in direct opposition to what's being said by the United Nations, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the World Health Organization, the International Energy Agency, the British Medical Association. I could go on and on and on. Everybody knows that this is, in the words of the Secretary General of the UN, moral and economic madness. What Rishi Sunak is doing here is he is signing our death sentences with these licences.
What do you make of his explanation for why he's doing it? What do you make of what he says? It's not possible to go straight to net zero. It's not possible to abandon fossil fuels. We have to do this. It's the right thing to do. And anyone who doesn't think so, he says, is insane. It's sanity that he's showing, nothing else.
Well, unexpectedly, I completely disagree with what he's saying. He's lying to us. There is absolutely no sense that the physics of it just simply doesn't make sense. We do not need to be continuing to extract oil and gas licenses in order to reach net zero. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. We need to be transitioning responsibly, and by saying responsibly, I mean we have to look after the needs of the energy needs of the poorest people in our communities, and we have to look after the jobs of the people who work in the energy industry, but we need to safely transition immediately to clean, sustainable, cheaper, renewable sources of energy.
And in a couple of lines, Chloe, how do we do it in a couple of lines?
Well, listen, it's all been set out for us. We know that we can achieve what we need to do by shifting to renewable energy. In this country, we've got an abundance of wind, we've got plenty of solar, and we've got an abundance of tide. We need a mixed renewable energy ecology. So he's simply lying to us when he says that we need oil and gas. He's also lying to us when he says that this is about energy security in this country. That oil and gas is being licensed to international companies, and they will sell that oil and gas on the international energy market. It doesn't belong to us. It's not coming to us. It's not going to reduce our gas and oil bills. It's not going to help anybody heat their home again when we have another energy crisis this winter. So I'm afraid he's simply lying to us.
All right, thank you, Chloe. Let's bring in Ross Clark, who's the author of the climate book called Not Zero. Ross, thanks for joining us today. What do you make of what Rishi Sunak says? Because he says it with great conviction. He says it as if this is a plan that is going to propel us in the most sensible way possible towards net zero, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, there's two elements. So firstly, in the short term, I mean, most people accept not just stop oil, obviously, but most people accept that in the short term, whatever happens with net zero, in the longer term, for the next couple of decades at least, we will remain dependent on oil and gas. And if we don't produce it ourselves, then we'll be importing it. And it makes for not just economic sense, but it makes environmental sense to produce our own, because if you do as we're doing at the moment, which is importing liquefied natural gas in ships from Qatar and the US, that has a higher carbon footprint than it does if we produce the gas locally, because you have to consume a lot of the energy to compress the gas and then decompress it at the end. So it makes environmental as well as economic sense. But there's also the longer term, because Rishi Sunak's policy really can be summed up in 3 words: just continue oil, because he's looking at continuing the oil and gas operation in the North Sea beyond 2050, when he says, you know, we'll have reached net zero. And what he's saying is that, well, what we're going to do is we're going to carry on using oil and gas. It will constitute still a quarter of our energy needs after 2050, but we will capture the carbon dioxide and store it underground so that, you know, we can use oil and gas without emitting CO2 to the atmosphere. Now, there are some people who simply will not accept that in the environmental movement, like Just Stop Oil, who seem to have an ideological objection to the oil and gas industry. Now, carbon capture and storage has been in operation since the 1970s, by the way, ironically used by oil and gas industry to pump carbon dioxide underground to squeeze out more oil and gas. But it's true, it's not been sort of commercialized in the sense that Rishi Sunak now wants to use it for, removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And it may not prove economic. We can't be sure about that at the moment. But I mean, I would ask, Chloe, if this technology did prove to work and it did remove, most of the carbon dioxide from oil and gas, would you still have your ideological objection to oil and gas extraction if it's not actually, if it wasn't actually contributing to carbon dioxide in the atmosphere?
Chloe, do answer. That's an excellent question.
When we're dealing in fantasy, carbon capture technology has not been proven to exist at the kind of scale necessary. Now, it is mentioned, hang on a minute, let me answer. It is mentioned in the IPCC's most recent report. That is the world's experts on climate change and climate crisis and on what we need to do to mitigate it. Carbon capture needs to be used to remove the very small percentage of carbon emissions that we simply will never be able to get rid of. But what we're talking about, so I've got a fact that's been shared with me today. So the Acorn carbon capture plant that's been talked about is claiming that it can remove 1 million tonnes of CO2 per year. That's equal to the average annual emissions of 35 commercial aircrafts. It's tiny. And it cannot be used as an excuse not to do the reductions that we need to do in our emissions. Carbon capture has to be used to remove the things that we absolutely cannot get out of our economy and of our system. Cannot be used to allow us to continue the way we are right now.
Let's include in this conversation Conservative MP Craig Mackinlay. Hello, Craig. Thank you very much. You've listened very charmingly. You're chair of the Net Zero Scrutiny Group. You're scrutinising, no doubt. What do you see as you scrutinise?
Well, we've been trying to sort of split out the fact from the fiction, from the greenwash, the nonsense that's going on the net zero pathway. And I must compliment Ross on his book, Not Zero. It was a very good read. I really enjoyed it. But Chloe has put into the mix here various different international bodies. Now, the Climate Change Committee, a UK body set up with the 2008 Climate Change Act, not a body that I usually have a great deal of time for, but they estimate that we will be using oil and gas up to 2050 and beyond. Now, as Ross quite rightly says, where do you want to get that from? You either spend a lot of money abroad, i.e. in Qatar. Did you know last year in August, we actually imported an LNG ship from Australia. So you've got the gasification that Ross described. You've also got the diesel that's used in getting a ship halfway around the world, and perhaps even a fleet of ships that you might not even need the manufacture of in the first place if you've been sourcing domestically. So what I see today about sourcing domestically and getting more out of the North Sea, just as Norway has been doing for years and has been promoting, is the opportunity to get Britain more energy secure. The opportunity for us to build up some fat in reserves to actually do all the good things that Chloe would rather we were doing. And you're not going to be doing that by spending your money in Qatar, Australia, or anywhere else. So on every measure on saving CO2, domestic supply has got to be better, because even the CCC, Climate Change Committee, reckon that we will be using gas and oil for a long, long time yet. And then you've got the economic benefits. You've got investment in the UK. You've got jobs. You've got a nice lot of tax comes out of that industry. And also you've got a big saving in balance of payments deficits, which this country has had for a very long time. So, this is almost like a suite of a really good hand of cards we've been given here. We were fortunate enough to be blessed by nature to be having the North Sea Basin with oil and gas in it. And just last year alone, we spent £40 billion with Norway. I mean, that is just ridiculous when we are feeding out of the same basin, which we could be providing for ourselves. And obviously, you have to take into consideration the actions of hostile actors like Putin with the Ukraine war, which caused complete crisis across Europe in terms of price rises, potential for blackouts, and all the rest of it. Now, I know Chloe would rather have renewables, but we're yet to solve that problem of where do you store the excess energy when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. I mean, the only one that's really on the cards at the moment seems to be batteries. Now, batteries to me are an environmental horror. You've got China very much entrenched in the supply chain. You've got the complete pillaging of vast amounts of the world to actually get the rare minerals out. And frankly, I don't feel at all comfortable committing even more children in the Democratic Republic of Congo to digging up cobalt.
All right.
So,
On that note,
they're
I'm going to have to say thank you very much
choices.
to all of you. I'm sure we'll continue this debate, imminently on another occasion, not too far in the future. Thank you very much indeed, all of you, for joining me.